The afternoon sun streamed through LaGuardia Airport's vast windows as a distinguished gentleman in his early 40s made his way through the bustling terminal. His perfectly pressed navy suit and polished Oxford shoes spoke of success, while his calm demeanor reflected years of navigating the corporate world. Behind him rolled an elegant piece of Louis Vuitton luggage, its distinctive monogram pattern catching the light. He had just wrapped up a series of high-stakes meetings in Manhattan, securing a deal worth millions for his investment firm. The satisfaction of success lingered in his mind as he checked his premium smartphone, responding to congratulatory messages from his team. 20 years of climbing the corporate ladder, countless late nights, and unwavering determination had earned him his position as one of Wall Street's most respected investment bankers. The terminal buzzed with the usual airport energy. Families reuniting, business travelers hurrying to their gates, and airport staff directing the flow of human traffic. As he approached the baggage claim area, he noticed something shift in the atmosphere. Two uniformed police officers, who had been casually observing travelers, suddenly straightened their postures and began moving in his direction. "Sir, could you step aside for a moment?" The taller officer's voice carried an edge of authority that seemed disproportionate to the situation. The businessman complied, maintaining his professional composure despite the unexpected interruption. "We've received reports of suspicious activity in this area," the second officer added, his hand resting deliberately on his belt. "Would you mind explaining your presence here?" The businessman reached for his ID with measured movements, years of similar experiences having taught him the importance of remaining calm. "I'm returning from a business meeting in Manhattan. I'm an investment banker with—" "An investment banker?" The first officer's skepticism was barely concealed. "And this is your luggage?" He gestured toward the designer suitcase. "Yes, it is." The businessman's voice remained steady, though his heart rate had begun to climb. He could feel the eyes of passing travelers now, some slowing their pace to observe the unfolding scene. A few had already pulled out their phones, their cameras capturing what was quickly becoming a spectacle. The officers exchanged glances, their disbelief evident in their expressions. "We'll need to verify these credentials," the taller one stated, reaching for his radio. The ID could be falsified. The businessman stood there, dignity intact but frustration mounting, as the officer's radio dispatch. 20 years of success in the financial world, a corner office overlooking Manhattan, and multiple board positions at Fortune 500 companies, yet here he was, being treated like a potential criminal because of assumptions made about his appearance. More travelers had begun to gather, their expressions ranging from concern to outright indignation. A woman in a business suit stepped forward, her laptop bag slung over her shoulder. "This is ridiculous," she announced loudly. "I just saw him in first class on my flight from Chicago. He's clearly a professional." The officers hesitated, but their suspicion remained evident. They continued their questioning, scrutinizing his business cards, his company ID, even his recent flight itinerary. The businessman answered each question with patience, though the familiar weight of discrimination pressed heavier with each passing moment. Through the growing crowd, a figure in an airport security uniform approached with purpose. The head of airport security, a veteran of 15 years at LaGuardia, immediately recognized the businessman from his frequent travels through the terminal. "I can vouch for this gentleman," the security chief interrupted, his authoritative voice cutting through the tension. "He's one of our most frequent first-class travelers and sits on multiple corporate boards. What seems to be the problem here?" The officer's demeanor shifted instantly, their previous certainty crumbling in the face of this new information. Security cameras had captured the entire incident, including the officer's selective targeting, passing by multiple travelers with similar luggage before singling out this particular businessman. The gathering crowd had grown larger, many recording the scene on their phones. Some were already sharing the incident on social media, where it would soon spark a broader conversation about racial profiling in public spaces. The businessman, though finally free to go, knew this moment would resonate far beyond the confines of LaGuardia Airport. The aftermath of the initial confrontation unfolded like a ripple in still water. As the businessman stood there, surrounded by a growing crowd of concerned onlookers, his phone buzzed continuously with notifications. The video of his detainment was already spreading across social media platforms, igniting discussions about racial profiling in public spaces. The two officers, now visibly uncomfortable with the situation they had created, shuffled through their paperwork with nervous energy. Their earlier confidence had evaporated under the weight of mounting evidence of their mistake. The head of airport security, still present at the scene, began asking pointed questions about their protocol and decision-making process. "What specific suspicious activity were you responding to?" he questioned, his voice carrying the authority of his position. The officers exchanged glances, their answers becoming increasingly vague and contradictory. It became apparent that their suspicious activity report was based more on prejudice than fact. A young woman from the crowd stepped forward, her corporate attire suggesting she too was a business traveler. "I've been watching for the past 20 minutes, she stated firmly. These officers walked past at least 5 other travelers with luxury luggage without a second glance. Her words carried additional weight as she held up her phone, showing a recording that confirmed her observation. The businessman, meanwhile, maintained his composure while reaching out to his legal team via text. Years of corporate experience had taught him the importance of documenting everything. He noticed several supportive messages from fellow passengers who had witnessed the incident, offering to serve as witnesses if needed. Another witness, a retired judge who happened to be passing through, approached the security chief. "What I've observed here is a clear violation of civil rights," he commented, loud enough for everyone to hear. The selective enforcement of supposed security protocols based on racial profiling is not just morally wrong, it's illegal. The atmosphere in the terminal had transformed. What began as a routine day at LaGuardia had become a moment of collective consciousness. Travelers from all walks of life, regardless of their backgrounds, found themselves united in their opposition to the injustice they were witnessing. Some shared their own similar experiences, while others expressed shock at seeing such blatant discrimination firsthand. The businessman's corporate colleague, who had been on the same flight, finally managed to push through the crowd. He carried with him their presentation materials from the morning's successful meeting. "We literally just closed a multi-million-dollar deal," he announced, displaying their contract documents. "He's not just any investment banker, he's one of the top performers in our entire firm." The security chief, having seen enough, pulled the officers aside for an immediate discussion. Their body cameras had captured the entire interaction, and preliminary review of the footage showed clear evidence of biased behavior. The chief's face grew more serious with each passing moment as he reviewed the footage on his tablet. Meanwhile, the crowd had grown larger, with many airport employees stopping to observe the situation. A flight attendant who recognized the businessman from his frequent first-class travels approached with a bottle of water and a kind word. "I'm so sorry you're going through this," she said quietly. "We see you here all the time, always professional, always courteous." The businessman took a deep breath, straightened his tie, and checked his watch. Despite the unfair detention, he had meetings to prepare for, calls to make, and a company to help run. But he also knew this moment was bigger than his personal inconvenience. This incident could serve as a catalyst for meaningful change in how law enforcement interacts with minorities in public spaces. As he finally prepared to leave the scene, he noticed a group of young professionals watching from a distance, taking in every detail of what had transpired. In their eyes, he saw a mix of emotions: anger at the injustice, admiration for his composure, and determination to ensure such incidents become relics of the past rather than regular occurrences in the present. The next few hours unfolded like scenes from a carefully scripted drama, but this was entirely real. The businessman's phone kept lighting up with notifications as the video of his detainment spread across social media platforms. News organizations had picked up the story, and requests for interviews were flooding his inbox. Back in his office overlooking the Manhattan skyline, he sat in his leather chair, tie loosened, watching the incident footage play on various news channels. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Here he was in his corner office, surrounded by awards and accolades, while hours earlier he'd been treated like a suspicious character at the airport. His executive assistant knocked gently before entering with a stack of messages. "The board members have called an emergency meeting," she said softly. "They want to address this immediately." The businessman nodded, knowing this incident had become larger than himself. The company's PR team had already assembled in the conference room next door. They could hear the urgent discussions through the wall, talks of press statements, social media strategies, and corporate responsibility. But the businessman had something different in mind. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he rarely used. On the other end, a civil rights attorney who had been his college roommate answered immediately. "I saw what happened," his old friend said, skipping any pleasantries. "This isn't just about you anymore. This is about every professional who's ever been profiled." Meanwhile, back at LaGuardia, the two officers were facing an internal investigation. Security footage showed them bypassing multiple travelers with similar luggage, making their selective enforcement impossible to deny. The airport's chief of security had called an emergency staff meeting, and the atmosphere was tense. The businessman's inbox filled with messages from other executives sharing similar experiences, stories they'd kept quiet for years, fearing professional repercussions. One message particularly stood out. A young intern at his firm had written about how seeing the video had given him hope that things could change. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a major news network requesting an exclusive interview. The businessman paused, considering the platform this incident had given him. He thought about the young professionals who had watched him at the airport, about the intern's message, about all the similar incidents that had gone unrecorded and unreported. In the office kitchen, he overheard two junior analysts discussing the incident. "Did you see how he handled it?" one whispered. "So much dignity under pressure. That's real leadership." The businessman smiled slightly, realizing that sometimes leadership meant standing up to injustice, even when it was uncomfortable. The company's chief diversity officer appeared at his door, tablet in hand. "The video has over 1 million views," she reported. "People are calling for action, not just awareness. They want to see real change." She paused before adding, "This could be the catalyst we've been waiting for." His wife called, her voice filled with a mixture of concern and pride. "Remember when you told me you wanted to make a difference in the corporate world?" she asked. "Well, maybe this is bigger than that. Maybe this is your chance to make a difference in the whole world." Looking out his office window at the city below, the businessman made a decision. This incident wouldn't be buried under corporate statements and carefully worded apologies. He would use his position, his influence, and this moment to push for genuine change in how public spaces handle security and profiling. He began drafting a statement, not a defensive one, but a call to action. This would be about moving forward, about creating systemic change. As he typed, he thought about all the others who had faced similar situations without the platform or privilege to speak up. The sun was setting over Manhattan, casting long shadows across his office floor. Tomorrow, he would share his story with the world, not just as a successful businessman who faced discrimination, but as someone determined to turn an unfair incident into a catalyst for positive change. The morning news shows were ablaze with the story. The businessman sat in a quiet studio, preparing for his first major television interview. The makeup artist had just finished, and a producer was attaching his microphone. Through the monitor, he could see clips of the airport incident playing on repeat. "We'll live in 3, 2, 1. The red light blinked on, and the interview began. The host, known for her tough questions, leaned forward. "Yesterday's incident at LaGuardia has sparked a national conversation. What went through your mind during those moments?" The businessman spoke carefully, his words measured but genuine. "What struck me most wasn't the personal humiliation," he began. "It was thinking about all the others who face this daily without the platform I have to speak up." The host nodded, recognizing the weight of his words. Back at his investment firm, employees gathered in the break room, watching their colleague on live television. The room fell silent as he described how 20 years of corporate success, an Ivy League education, and a senior executive position hadn't shielded him from prejudice. His phone buzzed with a message from the board chairman, "You're changing the narrative. Keep going." The support from his company had been immediate and unwavering. They weren't just backing him, they were ready to lead by example in addressing systemic bias. The interview cut to footage from LaGuardia's security cameras. The selective targeting was clear. The officers had walked past multiple travelers with luxury luggage before stopping him. The evidence was undeniable, making the incident impossible to dismiss as a misunderstanding. In the airport's security office, staff watched the interview in silence. The chief of security had already implemented immediate changes to their protocols. "This stops today," he had announced in their morning briefing. "We're here to ensure safety, not perpetuate prejudice." Social media exploded with reactions. Other professionals began sharing their stories, creating a flood of similar experiences that had gone unreported. The hashtag not an exception started trending, highlighting how common such incidents were. The businessman's inbox filled with messages from young professionals of all backgrounds. "Watching you stand up with such dignity gives me hope," one wrote. "Your response shows us how to fight prejudice with professionalism and purpose." His corporate colleagues had sprung into action. The diversity and inclusion team was already drafting new training programs. Human resources was reviewing hiring practices. The legal team was looking into ways to support reform in public security protocols. During a break in filming, the businessman checked his messages. The airport authority had requested a meeting, not to smooth things over, but to consult on revising their security procedures. Real change was beginning to take shape. The interview moved to discussing solutions. "We need more than just awareness," he explained. "We need systemic change in how we approach security and profiling. Every professional, every traveler, deserves to be treated with dignity." In offices across the country, people were watching. Young graduates saw someone who looked like them speaking truth to power. Senior executives saw a peer challenging them to do better. Security personnel saw an opportunity to reform their approaches. The businessman's words resonated beyond the corporate world. Community leaders reached out, seeing an opportunity to bridge gaps between law enforcement and the public. Civil rights organizations offered support in turning this moment into a movement. As the interview concluded, the host asked one final question: "What's your message to those watching who might face similar situations?" The businessman paused, thinking of all the young professionals watching. Stand tall, know your worth, and never let anyone's prejudice define your story. 1 week after the LaGuardia incident, the ripple effects were still spreading. The businessman sat in a high-level meeting at the Port Authority, surrounded by airport officials, security experts, and civil rights advocates. The atmosphere was different from the usual corporate gatherings. There was an urgency, a shared understanding that this moment demanded real change. "We've reviewed every security incident from the past year," the head of airport operations announced, spreading documents across the table. "The pattern is undeniable." Charts and graphs showed clear evidence of biased enforcement, something everyone knew existed but few had been willing to address openly. The businessman's phone lit up with a message from a young professional mentee: "You've given us courage to speak up." Similar messages had been flowing in steadily, each one reinforcing the importance of this moment. Corporate leaders across the country were reaching out, eager to learn how they could drive change in their own organizations. In the airport's training center, a new program was taking shape. Security officers gathered for enhanced awareness sessions, watching real incidents and discussing better approaches. The businessman had insisted on being part of this process, sharing his perspective not with anger, but with hope for improvement. "It's not about pointing fingers," he explained to a room full of officers. "It's about recognizing our biases and learning to do better." The officers listened intently, many nodding in agreement. Some shared their own experiences with prejudice, creating bridges of understanding. Back at his firm, the impact was equally significant. The board had approved a major initiative to support civil rights organizations working on public space equality. Young professionals from diverse backgrounds were being actively recruited and mentored, creating pathways to leadership positions. The company's annual client meeting took on a different tone this year. Instead of just discussing profits and market trends, they addressed social responsibility. "Our success means nothing if we can't use it to drive positive change," the businessman told the assembled group of investors and partners. His inbox filled with speaking requests from universities and corporations. Everyone wanted to hear not just about the incident, but about turning a moment of discrimination into a catalyst for change. He chose his appearances carefully, focusing on venues where his message could have the most impact. The airport's security chief called with surprising news. Reports of similar incidents had dropped significantly since the new training programs began. Officers were approaching their duties with greater awareness, and travelers reported feeling more respected. In the corporate world, other executives began sharing their own stories. The wall of silence around professional discrimination was cracking. Senior leaders who had kept quiet about their experiences were finally speaking up, creating a domino effect of awareness and action. A month after the incident, the businessman stood at a podium in a packed auditorium. Before him sat hundreds of young professionals, eager to hear his story. But he wasn't there to dwell on the past. He was there to inspire future leaders. Success isn't just about climbing the corporate ladder, he told them. It's about reaching back to help others climb with you. The audience leaned forward, hanging on every word. These were the changemakers of tomorrow, and they were ready to learn. His words resonated beyond the auditorium walls. Companies across the country began reviewing their diversity policies, not just as a checkbox exercise, but as a fundamental aspect of their business strategy. The incident had sparked a conversation that was long overdue. As he left the auditorium that evening, a group of young professionals stopped him. "Your story changed how we see ourselves in the corporate world," one said. "It showed us that we can succeed without compromising our dignity." 3 months after the incident, the businessman found himself back at LaGuardia Airport. This time, the atmosphere was markedly different. The security checkpoints had been reorganized, with new protocols clearly posted. Officers wore body cameras, and supervisors actively monitored interactions with travelers. He noticed a familiar face, the head of airport security who had intervened that day. They exchanged knowing nods. The changes they had implemented were working. Reports of biased treatment had dropped significantly, and passenger satisfaction scores were rising. In the terminal's main hall, a new training session was underway. Through the glass walls, he could see officers engaged in scenario-based learning. The trainers included professionals from various backgrounds, sharing their experiences and perspectives. This was real change in action. His phone buzzed with an email from the police commissioner. The department had completed its investigation of the 2 officers involved in his incident. Rather than merely punishing them, the department had used the case as a learning opportunity. The officers had undergone extensive retraining and were now helping to educate their colleagues about unconscious bias. The business world had taken notice too. Major corporations were reaching out to learn about implementing similar changes in their own security protocols. Hotels, shopping centers, and other public spaces were revising their approaches to customer safety and dignity. During a board meeting at his firm, the discussion turned to measuring impact. The numbers told a compelling story. After implementing new diversity initiatives and speaking out about bias, the company had seen an increase in job applications from minority candidates. Employee satisfaction scores had risen, and client feedback was overwhelmingly positive. His assistant brought in a stack of letters, handwritten notes from young professionals across the country. Each shared a story of finding courage through his example. One letter particularly stood out. "You showed us that we can fight discrimination with dignity and create change through leadership." The business press had picked up on the broader implications. Articles discussed how addressing bias wasn't just about social justice, it made good business sense. Companies that tackled these issues head-on were seeing improved performance, better talent retention, and stronger community relationships. At a corporate leadership summit, the businessman took the stage to share the lasting impact of the incident. The audience included CEOs, security chiefs, and policymakers. "What happened at LaGuardia wasn't unique," he explained. "What's unique is how we chose to respond, not with anger, but with action." His words resonated across industries. Banks reviewed their security procedures. Retail chains examined their loss prevention tactics. Hotels reassessed their guest screening processes. The ripple effect continued to spread, touching every corner of the business world. Back in his office, he reviewed a proposal for a new foundation, one dedicated to promoting equality in public spaces. The seed money had come from his own company, but other corporations were already pledging support. This would be his legacy, far beyond any business deal. The businessman's calendar was filled with speaking engagements, but he prioritized talks at police academies and security training centers. These were the front lines where change needed to happen. The officers in training weren't just listening. They were actively engaging, asking questions, seeking to understand. As the sun set over Manhattan, he stood at his office window, reflecting on the transformation of the past 3 months. His phone lit up with another message. this time from a young officer who had been inspired by his story to change how he approached his duties. "You helped me see that true security comes from respect, not suspicion." 6 months had passed since that fateful day at LaGuardia. The businessman stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., addressing a congressional committee on public security reform. The room was packed with lawmakers, civil rights leaders, and media representatives, all eager to hear his testimony. His words carried the weight of experience and the promise of change. "What happened to me was not unique," he began, his voice steady and clear. "What's unique is the response we've seen from law enforcement, from corporations, and from the public." The data backed up his words. Reports of biased security incidents at major airports had decreased by 60% since the new training programs were implemented. LaGuardia's model was being adopted by airports across the country, proving that change was possible when people committed to making it happen. In the audience sat the airport security chief who had intervened that day. He had been promoted to oversee a nationwide training initiative, sharing the lessons learned from the incident with security personnel across the country. The two officers involved had become advocates for reform, speaking candidly about their own journey of understanding. The businessman's investment firm had transformed too. Their new mentorship program had helped dozens of young professionals navigate the corporate world while staying true to themselves. Other companies were following suit, creating a ripple effect across industries. His phone buzzed with a message from his wife. Their daughter had just been accepted to business school. "Your story inspired her," the message read. "She wants to continue the work you started." This was perhaps the most meaningful impact of all, inspiring the next generation to push for even greater change. The foundation he had established was thriving. It had already funded research into bias in public spaces, supported training programs for security personnel, and provided legal assistance to those facing discrimination. More importantly, it had created a platform for voices that needed to be heard. Back at LaGuardia, a new exhibit in the terminal told the story of the incident and the changes it sparked. Interactive displays showed travelers their rights and security officers their responsibilities. It wasn't about shame or blame, it was about learning and growing. The businessman's calendar remained full, but now it included regular meetings with police academies, security firms, and corporate boards. He had become a bridge between different worlds, helping each understand the other's perspectives while pushing for continuous improvement. His next project focused on technology, developing AI systems for security screening that would eliminate human bias. The prototype was already showing promising results, proving that safety and dignity could coexist. The young professionals who had witnessed the incident 6 months ago had become leaders in their own right. They were implementing changes in their organizations, mentoring others, and carrying the message forward. The cycle of positive change continued to grow. In his quiet moments, the businessman reflected on how a single incident had sparked such widespread transformation. It wasn't just about him anymore, it was about every person who had ever faced similar treatment, and every person who would now be treated with more dignity because of these changes. Looking out over the Capitol building, he thought about the future. The work wasn't finished, it never would be. But they had started something important, something that would continue to grow and evolve long after his story was just a chapter in a larger narrative of progress. As he concluded his testimony, he shared a final thought. Change doesn't happen in a single moment. It happens when we choose to learn from our mistakes, when we have the courage to speak up, and when we work together to build a better future for everyone.